of what all storytelling starts from. It's nature, the heart of nature. Well, that is exactly why we've got these amazing speakers who'll talk to you about it. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, join hands, put your hands together as we join in this discussion with Arati Kumar Rako in conversation with Mihri Rikamanayaka.
Hi everybody, and thank you for coming on a Friday. I'm going to start with a small reading from my book, Margin Lands, Indian Landscapes on the Brink. This is a part where I'm in the desert, so quite far from the kind of landscapes you have here around Colombo, but this is in the Thar Desert in the state of Rajasthan in India. As we crisscross Jaisalmer district, we continuously encounter two different worlds. In one lives a people grounded, observant, wise to the magic and the limitations of the desert, and therefore able to survive, even thrive, in a seemingly hostile environment. In the other lives officialdom, a hodgepodge of departments and bureaus, unaware of the intricacies of the land, intent on imposing their will on an ecosystem they continue to misunderstand. I think of the fable of the 6 blind men and the elephant, and I reimagine it for our times. One touches the limestone in the desert and thinks, a resource to be mined. Another feels the wind that sweeps the desert into dunes and says, oh yes, carbon brownie points for the taking. A third feels the dryness of the sand and envisions a world of intricate canals and flourishing agriculture. And the fourth dreams of large stretches of acacia trees holding down towering dunes. Each touches an element of the desert at some opportunistic point and fashions his worldview accordingly. None bothers to fathom the desert in its intricate entirety, and therefore none appreciates how an intervention here could ruin an integral dynamic elsewhere. As the blind men come to blows over their individual interpretations, a sighted man comes along and tells them of the complex being, a living, breathing creature they have failed to comprehend as a whole. And the blind men listen as their limited knowledge is gradually replaced with a gently growing awareness. In the here and now of the desert, though, the fable has a grim denouement. There are the sighted, the viscerally aware, like the shepherd farmers like Chatar Singh, who is a character in the chapter, or Babu Singh, or any number of people who walk this land. They speak eloquently with the benefit of deep observation and a keen sense of the totality of a desert, far greater, far more nuanced than its individual parts. Chatar Singh looks up at a pile of clouds rising high into the sky. To the poetic eye of the desert dweller, the shape resembles a woman balancing a water pot on her head. They have a name for this cloud formation too, Panihari, water bearers. His own son, though, would not know the name nor understand the subtleties that Chatar Singh sees in the sky. The loss of a landscape lexicon is more acute than the vanishing of words. It foreshadows a time when the elemental connections between the land and its people will be severed. It plunges us into a blindness that is total, willful, destructive, the blindness of those who simply refuse to see. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you for that excerpt. That is from Margin Lands. The book that you've written. It's about an immersive narrative of India's vulnerable landscapes. in the context of the six blind men parable, Ati, how do you think that we can bridge the gap? How do you think we can bridge the gap between these fragmented perspectives to create a more holistic approach?
That's the million-dollar question. We are at a time where specialists and fragmentation and studying things in silos has become the norm. And we seem to have lost those dialogues, those conversations between whether it is sociology and hydrology or wildlife biology and conservation and development. We don't seem to be doing this kind of discussion and seeing the intersections and the connections. And I think that's the essence of the six blind men parable, where we're not seeing landscapes as a whole, as interconnected parts. A river basin, what happens at the beginning of a river is affected by what happens later on, and vice versa. And to see a river basin as a whole is so important, because there are things that affect one thing from another, and we seem to have lost seeing that. We see it as a piecemeal. Oh, let's build a dam here, or let's make a diversion here. Let's create a canal here, without really understanding what happens when you do that upstream and downstream. And I think the way we can reclaim that is to reacquaint ourselves with local geographies and understand how these essential parts of our survival have to be protected. So that slowing down and understanding the connections and getting reacquainted with our hyper-local, the land, which is what sustains us, is paramount today. So yeah, I think I would say slow down.
Okay, so you talk about the need to slow down. You talk about the need to connect with these vulnerable landscapes. You talk about rivers and waters. You talk about the importance of them, and maybe even experience changing seasons, right? But in a world which is often prioritized by speed and growth, how can we foster a deeper, more mindful relationship with our environment, especially in South Asia, where you find the most amount of threatened landscapes?
And also the landscapes are stressed by competing objectives. So absolutely. I think, again, it comes down to all of us, every one of us, educating ourselves about what is right for that part of land that we live in. A river has so many claims, right? Irrigation, electricity, just the biota of the river itself needs it, and so on. We are unfortunately at a time where the priorities are different, and our priorities are all about GDP. And I think what we have forgotten is something that Aldo Leopold said in 1949, which is so prescient and it's so relevant today. He said that civilization has so cluttered the elemental man-earth relationship with gadgets and middlemen that the awareness of that relationship is growing dim. We imagine industry is what supports us, forgetting what supports industry, which is basically the land. And so I think if every one of us stood up for, we can't hope for the government which has different priorities, or we can't wait for the government which has different priorities to step in, or maybe they do not understand the land like the people who walk the land understand it, right? So for example, in the desert dwellers, they're walking the land, they know the nuances, the undulations of the land. The same thing with the fishermen, the artisanal fishermen who are in the rivers. They understand what the river is and what it means to the left bank, what it means to the right bank, which could be completely different things. And we as outsiders don't understand that. So I think, again, reclaiming our connection with the land and then fighting for it. Because when we lose that connection, or when we are not informed enough and we don't have that local knowledge, that is when the interlopers can step in. People with the marketing dollars and the budget, they can step in and usurp the land for and sell us any story. If we don't know how to fight for it and we don't know how to recount that and just kind of rebel against it, fighting for the land, we're going to lose it. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand the local geographies of wherever we may be. We may be in a suburb of Colombo, which could be very different in its needs from a different suburb of Colombo. So put on your walking shoes, go out there and reclaim that knowledge, that very local indigenous knowledge of the land.
Can you suggest some ways where you can inspire communities to engage more with these lands before?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that we usually wait for something wrong or bad to happen before we start to engage. And I'll give an example of this city that I come from, Bangalore, which gets enough and more rainfall than what it needs for its fully functioning. It gets more than twice the amount of rainfall than what it needs. But while we flood every monsoon, our wells run dry the minute the monsoons end, which basically means that we haven't understood the land at all. And once last year, what happened was we got so much rain in 2 days that the communities of multi-million-dollar homes flooded so much so that CEOs had to be evacuated by boats and by tractors that came pulling those boats through those communities. Mercedes, Maybachs, and Audis were underwater. Millions of dollars went underwater. That is when people woke up and realized the value of protecting wetlands and not building over them. Now, unfortunately, it took that to happen, but it's not difficult to be able to connect with communities to understand. I don't think I think the place where we'll find more resistance is when something is imposed upon us from tops down, that this is what is going to happen. So I feel that if we can, all of us can just arm ourselves with what is right and not fall for those stories, I think half the battle is won there.
I think similarly we have the same problems where most of our rivers are polluted by pesticides, human intervention, diversion of rivers. So it's very similar. We have mansions built on wetlands, unfortunately. So many of your stories focus on rivers, ecosystems, and the communities that depend on them. Ati, what drew you to what made you focus on this? What was there?
So I think I'll have to go back to my childhood for that.
Okay.
And it's something that I write about in the book. When I was very little, I must have been 8, 10, an uncle used to visit. He used to work in the World Bank, and he was a top economist with the World Bank. And at that time, World Bank was on a dam building spree across the world. And my father is an environmentalist at heart, though he's an engineer by training, and he worked in a thermal power company for his day job. But he was talking renewable energy way back in late 70s, early 80s, before it was a catchphrase and important and all of that. And he was not very popular, as you can imagine, in the thermal power company. However, when they used to meet, my uncle and my father, there used to be these arguments, these debates. And as a little kid, I used to hide behind the curtains and shiver and kind of cower because they used to get so heated, where my uncle was for dams and my father was against it. But my father, I think, listening to how my father was rationalizing why large dams may not be the greatest and the best solution, as well as he would read to me from the works of Wendell Berry and Masanobu Fukuoka and a lot of these people. I think those, somewhere at that time, I think I was kind of resisting it. And I was as a kid, I was whatever. But I think it stayed with me, and as I became a teenager and later on, I realized that is what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell stories about the landscape. And I wandered. It's not like I immediately got into that. I wandered and I went all over corporate and did 3 masters of various completely unrelated subjects. But when it came time for, I think I truly introspected to see what I wanted to do, it was telling stories about the landscape. And because, again, you know, I saw a map of India where in the northeast there were 160 small black bars, and each bar represented a dam on the tributaries of the Brahmaputra. And this is a highly seismic region, and unfortunately many of those dams are coming to fruition even today. And I wanted to document to see why, and to kind of tell the story of why that is not a great idea, and what we stand to lose in the process. So I think, yes, it was something that bubbled up from my childhood.
And so most of your travels, you do it by yourself. It's a solo travel.
Yes.
Any challenges you would have faced while out in the field? I know you go out for many months at a time.
So I think it's something that we, you know, a lot of us women who travel kind of also face, and especially if you're doing it for a living. I have a young daughter, and there were a lot of questions about, oh, what will happen to your daughter when you travel, and who's going to take care of your daughter when you travel? And my husband, who also travels, never got that question. So there were those kinds of situations, of course. But as a solo traveler, I felt that I could interact much more openly with the people I was with. They kind of adopted me almost, and it was just like, yeah, you can come stay with us, and you know, it was just almost liberation. It was a liberation to be solo and to completely immerse myself. And apart from, I never felt unsafe in places that I was in, and again, partly because I was mindful of not doing certain things, not going out alone at night and so on, which may not be the best things to do in certain places, but which is sad in itself, but that apart. There was a sense of, oh, this is our guest, and we need to be mindful of her. So there was a lot of that in rural India, and I never really felt unsafe. So there wasn't those challenges. But I think the challenges I felt, which was like something that I want to correct and work going forward, is it would always be the men speaking up. Any place I went to, even if the women were there and I was asking women a question, it would be the men that spoke for the women. And I would have to say, no, wait, I want her to answer. And oftentimes the women were so surprised that somebody was even asking them a question. Earlier Manu spoke about the women in Rajasthan and Barda. And literally it was like that when I sat with a lady one day and I asked her, if you weren't making these 400 rotis for something that she was making it for, what would you like to cook? What is it that you like to eat? And she was flummoxed. Nobody had ever asked her that. Nobody had ever asked her what she wanted to cook, what she wanted to eat. So I think those challenges of trying to get the point of view that is not the one you normally hear, I think was more than any other challenges that a privileged person like me, I mean, I'm clearly privileged with the fact that I can travel, that I can do the things that I do. Those are, I think, tiny challenges compared to something like this, where I wanted to really dig deeper and try to bring out voices that you don't normally hear.
So your work has been featured internationally. Your book has been highlighted in many instances. Have you seen any tangible outcomes from the work that you've done?
So, you know, it's the epigraph right in the beginning of the book, which I quote Kate Boo, Catherine Boo, where she says that, and I'm just paraphrasing, she says that I do not imagine that the individuals themselves are stories, but I imagine that when policies are being made, if these individual stories are known, then better policies will be crafted. And I think my goal really was limited to that. The fact that let me get these stories of these voices that we don't normally read in the mainstream. We always hear about what the government says, or you know what the government's plan is, and so on, and then we'll hear there were protests, you know, as a mass. So it was something that I wanted to just kind of bubble up to shine a spotlight on what it is really like for those people who are protesting, you know. What is their life like? What are we doing to the land? And so that was my limited goal with this. But more importantly, I love it when people come up to me and say, I have started looking at my garden differently after reading your book. It's just a garden, it's just a plant, it's a tree, but the fact that the chapter on bees touched them and now they're beginning to notice a bee which they would never have before or they would have shied away from it, I think that's a win. The fact that people are able to rekindle curiosity, the people are able to just go out there and see things with fresh eyes, and maybe my book helped in a small way in doing that. I think that itself is a win. That's impact for me as well.
You mentioned to me that you do not work with government. You do not deal with government officials. So ultimately, how do you get your message across? Because at the end of the day, they are the decision makers, right?
Right, and I think it's a slow process, Mihri. So for example, the way I'm working and I'm bringing out these stories, a lot of people who are working with policymakers and are reading these stories are finding it useful because they didn't know that this was happening in a certain part of the Brahmaputra, or maybe they knew but they didn't know the extent to which the bridge affected this. And so those connections are coming out where they then are able to be armed with some of these things and then they can go to. So while I don't particularly confront the government myself, there are enough and more people doing that. I'm not an activist, I'm a storyteller. And I kind of keep those things distinct. I feel that those people who are activists can then use a lot of these stories to arm themselves with data to understand what's going on in that place. Because all of these places that are in the margin lands are truly that. Why is it called margin lands? It's called because many of these people are on the margins of our psyche. We don't even think of these landscapes when we think of travel. We think of the national parks and we think of various other things, but we don't think of some of these places which are very much part of the same milieu, the same landscape. So while the government may be the final goal, I think I'm taking a smaller way, a more circuitous way to get to them.
Speaking about your work, I'm sure there are lots of aspiring writers, environmental writers here. Can you share your approach of blending art and journalism and science to tell your stories? And how do you decide which medium is best?
So, as a storyteller, I think it's just, we are living at a time when it's just a wonderful opportunity that we have where we can choose from so many different tools to tell a story. So words, photography, videography, art, all of these are different tools that we can use. And a story can have different parts to it, and different parts of the story can be better served by a different tool. Like some things may be better as a video. You just show it and people get it immediately. You don't need 1,000 words to say it. But some things need to be explained, especially in environment, because it's a nuanced topic. It's not as simple as every flood is climate change. So there are things that need to be explained, and at that time you need words, right? So I think the story informs the tools that one uses, and to skill yourself in those tools that you need to be able to tell the story well has been kind of my personal endeavor. I just wish that, if I need to be able to illustrate something to tell a story better, I would love to be able to do that. So I've been teaching myself art and so on. So picking up skills along the way, but using it as and when different things in the story require.
And then your notes, obviously you take down notes. How do you turn that into a compelling story?
I wish I could have a really smart answer for this. I'm terrible at taking notes, and my editor rolls his eyes because I'll come back from a full day of work and I'll be excitedly telling him about things, and he'll say, "Did you write it down?" And I'm like, no, I'll remember it. Oh no, that never happens. Write everything down. So it took me a while, but yes, it's not I know some people who have amazing methods of taking notes and stuff like that. For me, it's a little more organic. I write down a lot, I make drawings in my little book now. I use photography as a memory aid a lot. So a lot of things I'll take photos of or videos of so that I can remember what it sounded like, because sound for me is very important. It's a completely different layer that we tend to overlook in landscape storytelling. So sounds as well as video, and I try to write down what it smelled like, because I feel, telling a story with all the senses is just so beautiful. So those things I'll note down if I'm smart. If I'm not smart, then I don't note it down, and then I have to rack my brains later on when I'm writing. But yes, so there are pages and pages of notebooks, and I do have a small, kind of legend where I know that these are some quotes that I need, or these are things that are descriptions, or these I need to go back and research more, things like that. But it's not a very, I don't have a very smart way, so I wouldn't recommend my way to anybody.
About about the environmental issues, how would you like it addressed better to media and public?
Yeah, see, unfortunately our media, as well as our editors, they don't seem to have the appetite for sustained storytelling. And that's a pity, because environmental stories are slow burn. Yes, you may have a few events like a wildfire or something, but why? Or a fire in a wetland like we have in the place where I live in Bangalore. There is a lake which catches fire very often, imagine that. So why? And walking those things back to the actual reason and not just the symptom, and getting stuck with the symptom is very important. And we don't seem to have that appetite to slow down and follow stories back, forth, go back in history. And not just the media itself, but also the editors who are commissioning stories say, oh, just get this done. And flying in and out doesn't get you, doesn't show you the way forward, because you're not spending enough time to understand how a certain landscape got to where it is. And so I think one of the things that I would say is I wish we had an appetite for sustained, long-form, long-term storytelling, where you follow a landscape. The famous poet and author Rilke has said that it is, as it is with art, so it is with storytelling, where 1 year doesn't matter and 10 years are nothing. And that's truly what it is, because in the life of a landscape, imagine, 10 years are nothing. You have to keep following it to understand what's happening to a landscape. So imagine if we had media, and we had mainstream media which would actually follow a story over time. And I think those would give us lessons that would point us to the way forward, far better than saying, oh, it is again flooded in Assam. Now that flood, everybody assumes is because of monsoons, but really no, there are other things that are happening, which is why it's flooding in Assam every year. And floods are natural in Assam. It's a floodplain. Floodplains are meant to flood. So to see it as bad is also completely wrong. So, some of those things, if we could kind of go well beyond the surface and see it, and if our media would also do, kind of stick with a story to be able to tell it right, we'd all be served better.
Right. I think our time is up for questions from the audience. We have one question here. Do we have a mic?
Artika had a question. Hi, Sunila.
Hi. I'm just wondering, when you look at these landscapes and you want to conserve them, is there something in particular that jumps up? Because we have the same problems in Sri Lanka, right? But I'm not asking for an address or the name of a state or anything. But is there a place that, is there a ecological feature like a river? Or I don't know, leeward side of a mountain or a forested bed. Where do we begin? Because there has to be some. Because I think in Sri Lanka, I think conservation is spread thin on the ground, and in India it must be more so. So, would you be able to direct us towards something where we start?
Yeah, so for me at least personally, it's been like gathering strength. When I started in 2014, I went to a point on the Brahmaputra and just parked there. And I would talk to people listen. I mean, or rather, I would not talk, but I would listen to people. Because they pointed me in, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? Come, I'll show you this. Come, I'll show you that. And it's like gathering string. So you keep pulling, keep those little pieces of string with you. And you'll find that it all connects up. And then, connecting it into a tapestry, it begins to form. Again, it takes time. And so I would say start anywhere, pick anything, because everything is interconnected. And you will find your way, especially if it's, you guys have your river systems also. So, start anywhere on that river and you will find the storytelling unfold as you collect these strings. So, yeah, it's, and many of these, so for example, you could even start with one item in the newspaper which you think is not quite the whole story. Just go there and park, or keep going there, season after season, month after month, year after year, because then you'll start seeing the real picture. Because like we were talking about, a few of us were talking about earlier, if you go the first time, people only tell you what they think you want to hear. But if you keep going back to them and you listen to them long enough, then things really start bubbling up. And with you guys, of course, you all are lucky in some ways, don't have as many languages, but in India, it also makes a huge difference if you learn the local language, because the way what they speak between themselves tells you a whole lot other than what they tell you. So even just overhearing things, overhearing conversations, those things matter. But in terms of where to begin, I would say pick any point and it goes backwards from there, it goes forwards from there, and you can just keep collecting that string. Thank you, Sonala.
I just wanted to ask you, I was actually, since you're from India and I'm as well from India, how do you balance the economic side of it with the environmental side of it? Because we've just had stubble burning, and when you talk to the farmers, I was in Amritsar and I said, why are you doing that? They said, economically, the population has gone up. We need to grow crops so that it can reach the people, and if we don't burn, we cannot sow at the right time for the crop to come out, otherwise there will be a big problem. So
Yes.
how do you balance that?
It's a lovely question, and the reason it's lovely is because there's nothing in isolation. Nothing is an environmental problem, which is not an economic problem, which is not a social problem, which is not a medical public health problem. These are all interconnected and more and more. And so in storytelling, you need to be at the intersections of all those things. You can't tell a story in a silo and expect it to be complete or show you the way forward. So you're absolutely right. When you are looking at stubble burning, for example, taking the same example, solutions, you have to address the social, the economic solutions, because these things are all connected, and you'll never be solving one thing, you'll be putting a band-aid on it. The cancer will still grow, and you're not going to be able to solve anything by putting a band-aid on it. So you're absolutely right, and so people have to come together. These different bureaus, it comes back to the blind men, right? Everybody, even in the bureaus in the government, each one is seeing it through their own lens. Nobody's talking to each other. Whereas the solution lies in that discussion and coming together for.
So do you think that books such as yours should be part of the curriculum where the primary school children are learning, rather than what they're learning and they're not using in their adult life, day-to-day life, when they make economic conscious choices?
I think mine would be, I would be too self-aggrandizing, and if I had to say that, yes, my book would have to be. But people have said that there are stories like this that need to be told in schools or need to be taught in schools because the intersections and we have a bunch of authors here. In fact, Pranay's book, Indica, again, is one of those things where you're bringing so many different, disciplines together to tell the story. These things are important, and I think those kinds of readings in schools will inform a child far more than their current curriculum of, I think they have environmental sciences or something where they say, you need to close the tap tightly to conserve water or whatever it is, right? So it'll be great if we could move it that way and tell stories, but I think it also starts at home. We can tell those stories to our kids at home. We don't have to wait for the schools to catch up.
Possibly field trips.
Sorry?
School field trips are going to
Yeah.
be home. That's
Yeah,
one
huge, yes.
of taking children
Yes,
out there
yes,
and let them
absolutely.
experience it
Yes.
themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, just an interconnected question. I read somewhere that in the Amazonian tribes and certain ancient tribes, the way they traveled, the way they had visual memory, spatial memory, was amazingly enhanced, even better than those and stuff like that. And having lost that since humankind and could, the photographer, the way you archive and notice, could we bring that back into our sensibilities either through school or something where we just learn to, I mean they say autistic kids have fantastic spatial acquiring. Is there some skill set we've lost that we need to regain through
Yes.
social education?
So I'll answer that question in a slightly different way, and it was going to be something else that I was going to read earlier, which Mihiri wanted me to read, and I kind of switched it on her. Where I talk about how even just our mode of travel, whether it's in a car or a plane, we're cocooning ourselves. We are already disassociating ourselves from the landscape. Instead, if we were to just put on our walking shoes and walk through landscapes, just imagine how much we would learn and how much we would understand, in terms of how the land is. And cocooning, in so many different ways, has done us no favors at all. So you're absolutely right. I think there is a way to reclaim it, and in fact, I'm going to plug our session tomorrow, where I'll be sitting with Mihiri and Sunila, who's written a lovely book called Ravana's Lanka, which also talks about, how the ancients understood the land and they used various parts of the landscape for different things. And we've lost that. We've completely lost that. You're absolutely right. We think that we can live in spite of a landscape instead of living with the landscape. So that we do absolutely have to reclaim, but we can't reclaim that without making ourselves vulnerable to the landscape itself. Cocooning ourselves is not going to help. Then we'll just be building things in ivory towers, and it's completely, that's what has gotten us to where we are today.
I think we have one last question.
What are you working on currently, and what's next for you with your storytelling?
Thank you. I am taking off from Margin Lands. I have a National Geographic grant to document what happens to the people and the livelihoods after these landscapes have been devastated. They have to move. So migration, forced human migration due to devastated landscapes. But I think more importantly, the thing that I'm very keen on and looking forward to doing is writing fiction. Because I feel that these very themes, if that became part of our general psyche, like so many other themes in, through feature films and so on has become, we'll reach an audience which is much more than the limited audience that reads non-fiction and environmental stories. So that's my dream for I used to say next year, but now we're already in 2025. So later part of this year, I'm pushing it out a little bit.
Okay, I think our time's up. Aarti, thank you very much for that. That was very insightful talk.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give another round of applause. That is Arati Kumar Ravo in conversation with Mihiri Vikramanayake. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll jump into a short London